Emily glided across the polished wooden floor of the dance studio, her smooth and precise movements reflecting years of dedication. The scent of sweat and resin mixed with the classical music that filled the air. Los Angeles had always been her home, a vibrant place full of energy and opportunity, but she felt her true destiny was in New York. The invitation to join one of the world's most prestigious dance companies was a dream she had been chasing since childhood. Now, she was just steps away from making it come true. However, something held her back in Los Angeles, something that made her heart hesitate every time she thought about leaving. That something had a name: Michael. He was a brilliant sculptor, known for creating pieces that uniquely captured the human soul. His art studios in Venice Beach were filled with figures in motion, intense expressions carved in marble and bronze. Emily and Michael had met almost by chance at a local art exhibit, where one of his sculptures had especially caught her eye. The Soul of Dance depicted a ballerina mid-leap, muscles tensed and expression serene, as if she were at the peak of her freedom. In that moment, Emily knew she had to meet the artist behind the piece. "Do you like dance?" was the first thing she asked him, standing in front of the sculpture, still fascinated by the intricate details. Michael, who had been observing visitors from the corner, approached her with a calm smile. His light eyes sparkled as he replied, "I love movement. Dance is one of the purest forms of expression." And that's how it all began. The two became inseparable in the weeks that followed. Michael would watch her rehearse, mesmerized by the way Emily gave herself to the dance. He always said she seemed to fly, that her feet barely touched the ground. In return, Emily would accompany him to his studio, watching him create with patience and passion. Michael's hands, strong and calloused from working with stone, contrasted with his gentle voice when he spoke about art. Their connection was deep, not just physical but emotional, as if their souls spoke a language few others could understand. "You know New York is your place, right?" Michael remarked one night as they lay under the stars in Griffith Park. He knew about Emily's dream, but he also knew the weight that decision would carry for both of them. "I know," she whispered, her voice wavering as she looked up at the sky. "But sometimes I wonder if I'll be able to leave all this behind, to leave you." Michael turned on his side, resting his head on his hand. His gaze was loving but firm. "I don't want to be the reason you give up on your dreams, Emily." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a tightness in her chest. It was as if the idea of moving to New York was always there, hovering over them, even during their happiest moments. Every dance, every embrace, every kiss had an expiration date, and they both knew it. Their routine remained full of love and companionship. But now, with the dance company's invitation in hand, time seemed to slip through Emily's fingers. Each day brought a new rehearsal, another step toward the imminent change, and at the same time, the emotional distance between her and Michael began to surface in subtle ways. They tried not to talk about it, preferring to live in the present. They spent hours together in Michael's studio, where he sculpted figures that captured movement and grace, while she rehearsed to her favorite music. But even in those quiet moments, there was a tension in the air, as if goodbye was always lurking. Michael, for his part, felt the weight of Emily's decision. He knew the love he had for her ran deep, but he also knew that holding her back in Los Angeles would be depriving her of something greater. Still, a part of him wished she would give up the trip, stay by his side. This inner conflict consumed him in silence. "When you think of New York, what do you imagine?" Michael asked one night, as he watched her dance in the studio. Emily stopped and looked at him, her cheeks flushed from the effort. She smiled, but it was a melancholic smile. "I see myself on stage with the lights, the audience. It's like I'm finally where I've always belonged. But at the same time, I also see myself missing something. Missing you." Michael looked away, pretending to focus on the tools in the corner of the studio. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. He knew that Emily's dream was bigger than anything he could offer. And loving her meant, inevitably, letting her go. But not yet. Not so soon. In the months that followed, their relationship blossomed with the same intensity it always had. But both knew the clock was ticking. Every moment seemed precious and painful at the same time, as if farewells were always just around the corner. The tension between the love they felt and the inevitable future loomed over them, and even as they tried to live in the present, the shadow of separation was impossible to ignore. Emily knew that eventually, she would have to face the decision to move to New York, but for now, she was determined to live every second with Michael, even though her heart already knew how the story would end. The official invitation for Emily to join the dance company in New York arrived on a sunny spring afternoon. She was rehearsing in the studio, immersed in the choreography the company had sent as part of her final test. The movement required focus, control, and passion. qualities Emily had in abundance. However, the letter patiently awaited her at home, a formal notice that would change everything. When Emily returned home and found the golden envelope on her table, her heart raced. There lay the destiny she had always dreamed of, the recognition of years of work and dedication. She opened the envelope with trembling hands, carefully reading each word. The invitation was final. New York awaited her in 3 months, and her presence was requested for an initial 2-year contract. She stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper in her hands, and the shock of realizing she had finally made it. She was about to live her lifelong dream, but along with the excitement came the first wave of fear. What would this mean for her and Michael? How could they survive the distance, the expectations, and the pressure? Feeling a mix of joy and anxiety, she knew she couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. Later that night, Michael arrived at Emily's apartment with his usual smile and a small sculpture he had made for her. It was a miniature of a ballerina, capturing one of her iconic moves, a precise and elegant spin. He presented it without ceremony, placing the piece gently in Emily's hands with palpable affection. "I made this for you," he said softly, watching as she admired every detail. "It's how I see you when you dance." Emily was deeply moved by the gesture. It was something so personal, so full of love, that her heart ached as she thought of the news she was about to share. "Michael, she began, feeling the words catch in her throat. "I got the invitation. For New York." He froze for a brief moment, as if the weight of her words had hit him hard. The sculpture still in Emily's hands, and he didn't look away, as if trying to process the information. "So, this is it," he murmured, forcing a smile as he sat down on the couch. "You did it. Congratulations, Emily. It's what you've always wanted, right?" "Yes," she replied, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "But it means I'll have to leave in 3 months." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Michael rubbed his hands on his knees, staring at the floor as if searching for answers in the wood. He had always known this moment would come, but now that it was upon him, everything felt much harder. The love he had for Emily had never been in doubt, but how could they deal with the distance? How could he support her dream without losing himself in the process? 3 months, he repeated, as if preparing himself for the impact. "That's a good amount of time. We still have 3 months, right?" Emily nodded, feeling tears well up. She didn't want the moment to be like this. She didn't want the realization of her dream to come with so much sorrow. She sat next to Michael, holding his hand. "Michael, I don't know how to do this. How we can—" Her voice faltered as she tried to find words that made sense. He looked at her, his eyes shining with a mix of sadness and love. Michael knew he had to be strong for both of them. But inside, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "We'll figure it out," he finally said, squeezing her hand tightly. "I'm not going to let you carry this weight alone. This is your dream, and you need to live it. I always knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would be so soon." "Neither did I," she admitted, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed there for a long time in silence, as feelings of love, fear, and uncertainty enveloped them. The peaceful moments between the two were becoming increasingly rare as the reality of their separation drew closer. The invitation, which Emily had eagerly awaited, now felt like the beginning of an inevitable end. In the following days, their relationship was marked by a strange kind of hesitation. Although they continued spending time together, both were keenly aware of Emily's impending departure. Conversations that had once been carefree now carried the subtext of what happens after, as if every minute together was part of a countdown. One evening, while they were having dinner on the balcony of Emily's apartment, with Los Angeles shimmering in the background, Michael finally brought up what they had both been avoiding for days. "Emily, have you thought about what it's going to be like? The two of us being apart for so long." She took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation was inevitable. "I have, and it scares me. I want this so much, Michael. But at the same time, I don't want to lose you. I don't want this dream to destroy us." Michael furrowed his brow, as if carefully considering his words before responding. "Maybe we don't have to think of it as the end. Maybe it's just a new beginning for both of us." His optimism was sincere, but Emily knew that behind it, he was also afraid. The idea of a long-distance relationship seemed utopian at times, but impossible at others. Michael had his life in Los Angeles, his studio, his sculptures, his world was here, and while she knew how much she loved him, she couldn't ask him to leave it all behind to follow her. "Do you think we'll survive this?" Emily asked, her voice soft, almost afraid of the answer. Michael looked into her eyes, gently holding her face with both hands. "I don't know, Emily, but what I do know is that I love you. And I want you to be happy. Even if that means you're thousands of miles away from me." The love shining in Michael's eyes broke Emily's heart. She knew that sooner or later, she'd have to choose between the dream she'd always chased and the man she loved. And while the 3 months left seemed like a long time, each passing day only brought them closer to saying goodbye. The days following the invitation to New York were filled with conflicting emotions for Emily. During rehearsals, her mind was supposed to be focused on every step, every movement that defined her performance, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Michael. She danced with a new intensity, conscious that this could be one of the last times she would train in Los Angeles. Her feet moved with precision across the studio floor, but her heart grew heavier with each passing day. Michael, on the other hand, had thrown himself into his work at the studio, as if it could distract him from the looming reality. He sculpted nonstop, each piece more expressive than the last, as though he were channeling all his emotions into shapes of stone and metal. Yet, whenever Emily entered the studio, her soft smile and eyes full of affection made him forget, even if only for a few moments, the turmoil he felt inside. One afternoon, as Emily finished her rehearsal, she found Michael in the studio, sweaty and with his face covered in tiny streaks of clay. He was sculpting a new piece, a ballerina, of course. The captured movement was so delicate and dynamic, it almost seemed alive. She approached him slowly, touching his shoulder to make him aware of her presence. "It's incredible," she said softly, admiring the work. Michael smiled slightly and wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "I'm trying to capture you," he replied, looking at the sculpture as if searching for something he hadn't yet achieved. "But it's hard. Every time I think I've come close, I realize there's still something missing. Maybe it's the movement, or maybe—" He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "Maybe it's the fact that you're already leaving, even before you go." Emily felt a tightness in her chest at the honesty of his words. She knew Michael was right. Since the invitation to New York had arrived, part of her was already there, mentally and emotionally, planning the future she had always dreamed of. Yet another part of her resisted, trying to stay anchored to him, to the present, to the life she knew. "I don't want to leave like this, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to leave you behind." He stepped away from the sculpture and looked at her with a serious but loving expression. "I know. But I also know that if you stay, you won't be happy. Not completely. You'll always wonder what could have been. And I can't be the man who keeps you from finding that out." Michael's sincerity cut deep. The dilemma in her mind, already overwhelming, became even heavier. She knew he was right, but accepting it was almost unbearable. "And what will happen to us?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Michael sighed and held her hands, bringing them to his lips before responding, "I don't have all the answers, Emily. The only thing I know is that I love you. I want you to follow your dreams, but I won't lie. It hurts to think about living without you here." He let out a bitter laugh. "I spend my days sculpting, trying to capture beauty in something static. But your movement, life, I always knew you weren't someone I could hold on to." The weight of Michael's words brought a painful silence between them. Emily stepped back, feeling her heart tighten, and walked to the studio window where she could see the late afternoon light painting the Los Angeles sky with shades of orange and red. Every detail of the city seemed more vibrant now that she knew she'd be leaving it soon. New York awaited her, with promises of grand stages and a rising career. But at the same time, she couldn't imagine her life without Michael, without the unwavering support he had always given her. "Maybe I don't have to go," Emily murmured, almost to herself. Michael heard her and approached, wrapping his arms around her tenderly from behind. "No," he said softly. "You know you have to go. This is your dream, and you've worked so hard to get here. I love you enough to let you go, Emily. I won't let you sacrifice everything for me." Emily closed her eyes, letting the tears fall silently. She wanted to believe that love would be enough to overcome any distance. But deep down, she knew that this decision wouldn't be easy for either of them. The dilemma was tearing her apart, to stay and choose love, or to leave and follow her career. It felt as if she were being forced to choose between two essential parts of herself. The next day, Emily tried to continue with her rehearsal routine, but her movements were awkward, almost forced. Her mind kept drifting back to Michael and the words he had said the night before. She was torn between the future she had always dreamed of and the present she loved so much. Her mentor, Claire, a middle-aged woman who had dedicated her life to dance, noticed Emily's distraction and pulled her aside. "Is everything okay, Emily?" Claire asked, her voice firm but gentle. "You've been different these days." Emily hesitated before responding, looking at the studio floor as if hoping to find an answer there. "I got an offer to dance in New York," she confessed, in an uncertain tone. "But I'm torn. I don't know if I can leave Michael, my boyfriend, here in Los Angeles. I love him, and he supports me, but at the same time, the distance feels impossible. Claire remained silent for a moment, reflecting before speaking. When she finally responded, her words were full of wisdom. Love is a wonderful thing, Emily, but dance, this opportunity, is what you've worked your entire life to achieve. Don't make a decision based on the fear of losing something that, if it's real, will continue to exist, no matter the distance. Claire placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. I've been through this. In my time, I chose love and gave up my career. I don't regret my choice, but I always wonder what could have been. You have a chance to have both. Don't waste it out of fear. Claire's words echoed in Emily's mind as she prepared for the next rehearsal. She knew she had to make a decision soon, but the fear of losing Michael and, at the same time, losing herself was tearing her apart. Later that night, Emily and Michael met for dinner. She wasn't sure how to start the conversation, but she needed to open up. They sat at their favorite restaurant, a small bistro in Venice Beach, overlooking the ocean. The waves gently broke on the shore while the evening breeze carried the scent of the sea. Michael, she began hesitantly, I talked to Claire today. She told me that if our love is strong enough, it can survive the distance. But I don't know if I'm strong enough. Michael took her hand, gazing deeply into her eyes. You're stronger than you think, Emily. And I'm here. I'll be here, even if you go. I promise I'll always support you, no matter where you are. Emily smiled sadly, feeling her heart tighten once again. The decision was becoming clearer by the day, but that didn't make the process any less painful. Their love was real, but so was the future awaiting her in New York. As the decision weighed more heavily on Emily, both she and Michael knew they couldn't delay the inevitable. The conversations about the future, once avoided, became more frequent. It was as if they were both trying in some way to prepare for what was coming, though neither truly knew how to handle the separation. Despite this, Michael and Emily decided to take an optimistic approach. The idea that they could maintain their relationship long distance was, in some way, comforting. They began making plans, figuring out ways to see each other regularly and stay in constant contact. Michael suggested they could visit one another whenever possible, and Emily, despite the demands of her new dance company, allowed herself to dream that it might actually work. I'll try to come to New York at least once every 2 months, Michael said, as they walked hand in hand along Venice Beach. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And you can come here during your breaks. I know it'll be hard, but we can make it work. Emily looked at him, wishing Michael's words were enough to erase all her doubts. The idea of maintaining a long-distance relationship seemed more feasible when he spoke with such confidence. Yet she knew that real life didn't always align with plans. The exhausting routine of a dancer in a prestigious New York company would be completely different from the life she had in Los Angeles. Even so, Michael's optimistic smile made her believe, if only for a moment, that maybe everything would be okay. I want to believe in that, she replied, squeezing his hand, but I'm afraid it'll be harder than we think. What matters is that we want to try, Michael said, stopping to look at her. If the love we have is real, it'll survive this. I believe that, and I want you to believe it too. Michael's hopeful words lightened the weight Emily felt in her chest. She moved closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder as they continued walking along the beach. The sound of the waves gently crashing against the sand seemed to create a calming soundtrack, almost like a silent promise that everything would be all right. In the following days, Emily's life became increasingly hectic. She intensified her rehearsals, training daily for the final audition that would seal her spot in the New York Dance Company. The choreographies were challenging, demanding more from her physically and mentally than anything she had ever experienced before. Yet it was in this whirlwind of rehearsals that Emily found an escape, a way to forget for a few moments the internal conflict still tormenting her. Meanwhile, Michael was also deeply immersed in his work. His sculptures continued to evolve, with new pieces emerging almost daily. He spent long hours in the studio, as if trying to use art to cope with the pain he felt at the thought of Emily's imminent departure. Each figure he sculpted seemed to contain a piece of his heart, capturing movement and emotion with an intensity that even he found surprising. One evening, after a long day of work, they met at Emily's apartment. The atmosphere was calm, but charged with something both were trying to ignore: the looming farewell. I think I finally managed to create something that captures your essence, Michael said, smiling as he showed Emily the sculpture he had just finished. It was a larger and more detailed version of the ballerina he had made before, but now with an expression of freedom and lightness that seemed to overflow with life. Emily looked at the piece, her heart tightening at the sight of how much of herself was reflected in it. The movement, the grace, the strength, everything she had always wanted to achieve in dance was embodied in that work of art. "Michael, it's beautiful," she whispered, gently touching the sculpture. "It looks like me, but in a way I've never seen before." Michael smiled, though his eyes were filled with conflicting emotions. "I wanted to capture you like this. Free. That's how you are when you dance, Emily. And that's how I'll always see you, even when you're in New York." Michael's declaration deeply moved Emily, but it also made her feel the weight of the decision she was about to make. They were trying to be optimistic, but the effort to maintain hope was starting to wear them down. With each passing day, the reality of their impending separation became more tangible, and their love, strong as it was about to be tested in ways they couldn't yet foresee. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Emily turned to Michael and broke the silence. "Do you really think we can make this work?" she asked, her voice low and filled with vulnerability. "Sometimes I feel like we're fooling ourselves, trying to believe that love can overcome anything." Michael remained silent for a moment, thoughtful. He stared at the ceiling, as if searching for an answer in the shadows cast by the soft light of the bedside lamp. "I don't know, Emily," he finally replied. "But what I do know is that if we don't try, we'll regret it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been, if only we had tried." His sincerity struck a chord in Emily. She knew he was right. Even with all the uncertainties, what they had was special, something that couldn't just be abandoned without a real effort. They had decided to fight for it, at least for now. But Michael's words, though comforting, weren't enough to dispel the fear that distance might create a chasm too wide to cross. In the days that followed, they continued with their routine, trying to savor every moment together. They went to their favorite places, shared meals at their favorite restaurants, and laughed at the little things, just as they always did. But in every interaction there was a growing tension, an impending sense of goodbye that hung in the air, even though neither of them wanted to admit it. At the end of one of those nights, as they walked through the city, Emily suddenly stopped in the middle of the street. She looked at Michael with a gaze both sad and determined. "I'm going to New York, Michael. I'm going to follow my dream." Her voice was firm, but her eyes were full of emotion. "But I promise I'll do everything I can for us to stay together, even from afar." Michael looked at her, his heart heavy. He knew this moment would come, but hearing Emily's words made everything feel more real. He gently cupped her face and kissed her forehead, trying to convey all the love he felt for her. "I know you will," he replied with a sad smile. "And I'll be here, waiting for you." Their promise to each other was sealed. They both knew that, even with the distance, they would have to fight to preserve what they had. But as the days of Emily's departure drew nearer, what had once seemed like an optimistic attempt to keep their relationship alive began to reveal itself as more challenging than they had imagined. Time wasn't stopping, and the days Emily and Michael had left together were growing scarce. The date of her departure for New York was closer than ever, and despite the promises they had made, the reality of the distance was beginning to creep into their lives, like a shadow growing with each passing day. Emily began living on the edge between excitement and anxiety. On one hand, she was increasingly absorbed by the preparations for her move. Suitcases were being packed, her dance classes intensified, and farewells were being organized. Each day at the dance studio in Los Angeles became more intense, as if she wanted to soak in every bit of her city before leaving. On the other hand, there was Michael, whose world remained unchanged in Los Angeles. He didn't have an exciting new project waiting for him. His life would stay the same, except that Emily wouldn't be there anymore. He tried to cope by immersing himself in his sculptures, as he always did when he needed to escape from his problems. But this time, his artistic escape wasn't enough. One night, while they were having dinner at Emily's apartment, the tension they both felt finally reached a breaking point. Emily was distracted, pushing her food around, and Michael, noticing the growing emotional distance between them, finally decided to address the issue they had been avoiding for days. "Emily, you seem distant lately," he said, trying to keep his voice calm but with clear concern. "I know you're excited about New York, but I feel like you're already pulling away from me. Like, even before you leave, something between us is changing." Emily sighed, dropping her fork on the plate and giving Michael a weary look. "It's not that I want to pull away, Michael. It's just that all of this is happening so fast. I'm trying to prepare for New York, but at the same time, trying to maintain our relationship feels like running a second marathon. I feel like I'm trying to hold everything together at once, and it's suffocating." Michael felt the impact of her words like a punch in the gut. He had promised to be strong, to be there for her, but now he realized that Emily was fighting something bigger than he could control. And despite all his efforts, The love he offered didn't seem enough to ease the burden she was carrying. "I don't want you to feel suffocated by me," Michael said, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I thought we could make this work, even with the distance. But if you're already feeling this way now, how will it be when you're thousands of miles away?" Michael's words echoed in Emily's mind, and for the first time, she allowed herself to think about the reality of the distance. The rehearsals in New York would be endless, and her commitments to the dance company would consume most of her time. The truth was, she didn't know if she'd have enough space for the relationship amidst all of that. The idea of balancing her career with maintaining a long-distance love was becoming more and more overwhelming. "I don't know, Michael," she finally replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I want this to work, but I'm scared that life in New York will swallow me whole, and the last thing I want is to hurt you. I feel like with each passing day I'm drifting further and further away from you. I didn't want it to be like this." Michael looked away, feeling a tightness in his chest. He loved Emily deeply, but he knew he couldn't fight against her dream. Hearing her words, though painful, was the confirmation that the future he feared was approaching quickly. "Maybe we're trying to fight something inevitable," Michael said, his voice heavy with pain. "Maybe love isn't enough to keep us together if we're heading in such different directions." Emily looked at him, feeling tears begin to well up in her eyes. She didn't want to admit that he was right, but the fear that their lives were destined to part was impossible to ignore. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, feeling the weight of all the emotions she had been trying to suppress until now. "I don't want to lose you, but I can't give up my dream either. And it feels like no matter what I do, I'm going to end up losing something important." The two sat in silence for a long time, sitting at the dinner table, each lost in their own thought. The distant sound of Los Angeles traffic seemed to hum in the background, creating a sense of growing distance between them, even though they were so close physically. In the following days, things didn't improve. The closeness of Emily's departure brought new tensions to the surface. The optimism they had shared in the beginning about trying to maintain a long-distance relationship had been replaced by doubts and fears. Michael was visibly more distant, spending more time in his studio, and Emily, now fully immersed in preparations for New York, felt guilty for not being able to offer him the emotional support he needed. The phone calls and messages became more scarce. The long conversations about the future were replaced by quick, impersonal exchanges, both of them trying to avoid discussions they knew would only bring more pain. The relationship, once full of passion and connection, was now caught in a cycle of hesitation and uncertainty. On the night before Emily's departure to New York, they tried to recreate one of their old routines, going to their favorite restaurant in Venice Beach. The familiar atmosphere, which used to be comforting, now felt melancholy. The waves crashing on the beach and the soft sound of the wind created an almost sad backdrop, as if even nature knew that something was about to change drastically. "I wish things were different," Michael said, breaking the silence as he stared out at the sea. "I wish we could just stay here together and that everything could be easy. But I guess life doesn't work like that, does it?" Emily squeezed his hand tightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. She knew Michael was being brave, but the pain in his eyes was evident. He was trying to be strong, even as his heart was breaking. "I wish it were easier too," Emily said, her voice shaky. "I never wanted it to end like this." The silence between them was heavy, and the uncertainty of the future seemed to stretch out for miles. The goodbye, which had seemed so distant months ago, was now just hours away. When they returned to the apartment, they stayed silent, not knowing what to say or do. The apartment, once filled with laughter and memories, now felt empty, as if it knew the end was near. They sat on the couch, side by side, but the emotional distance between them was palpable. "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always love you," Michael said, his voice steady despite the sadness. Emily couldn't respond immediately. The emotion was overwhelming, and all she could do was turn and hug him tightly. The embrace lasted for long minutes, as if it were the last act of resistance before the inevitable separation. That night, lying together for the last time before Emily's departure, both knew that the relationship had reached a point of no return. The distance, the dreams, and the differences in their paths were creating a barrier that, though they both wanted to overcome, seemed impossible. The morning of Emily's departure arrived, shrouded in a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. The Los Angeles sun lit up the sky with a vibrant glow, but for Emily and Michael, the day felt cloudy and weighed down. The imminent farewell was a reality they could no longer delay. Emily looked at the packed suitcases by the door of her apartment, a physical reminder of what was about to happen. She tried to organize her thoughts, rehearsing the words she would say to Michael, but nothing seemed adequate. How do you say goodbye to someone you love, knowing that despite all the promises, the chances of seeing each other the same way again are slim? Michael arrived early, as they had agreed. He entered the apartment silently, his eyes scanning the familiar space that now felt foreign. The place that had once been their refuge was now a room for goodbyes. He looked at Emily standing next to the suitcases, her expression unreadable, and the silence that followed was profound. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Michael, she began, but her voice faltered. She couldn't find the right words. Everything she wanted to say seemed insufficient to express the depth of her feeling. Michael slowly walked over to her and hugged her, holding her tightly, as if he wanted to etch that moment into his memory. He took a deep breath, as if trying to absorb as much of her as possible before she left. "You don't need to say anything," he whispered, his voice soft but full of pain. "I know. I feel it too." They stayed like that for long minutes, enveloped in the silence of the apartment and the distant noise of the city. There were no more plans, promises, or empty words. Only the reality that in a few hours they would be in different places, living separate lives. When Emily finally pulled away, her eyes were filled with tears, but she tried to keep her composure. She looked at Michael, and the weight of everything seemed to collapse over them all at once. "I don't know how we're going to deal with this, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought it would be easier, but with each passing day it feels harder to accept. I don't want to lose you." Michael wiped the tears from her face with his hands and gave her a sad smile. "We knew this would be hard, Emily, but what I know is that I want you to follow your path, and I want you to be happy, even if that means I won't be by your side all the time." The sincerity in Michael's eyes broke Emily's heart. It was a kind of love that transcended selfishness, but at the same time, it was painfully selfless. She knew he was trying to be strong for her, but every part of that farewell seemed to leave him more broken inside. At that moment, Emily's phone rang, interrupting the moment of intimacy between them. She hesitated before answering, not realizing that that call would change the course of her life. "Hello?" Emily's voice was still thick with emotion. On the other end of the line was one of the directors from the New York Dance Company. He sounded serious, and as the conversation went on, Emily's expression slowly shifted from surprise to shock. I understand," she whispered. "Yes, thank you for letting me know. I'll be in touch." When she hung up the phone, she stood there, frozen, stunned. Michael watched her from a distance, worried by her expression. "What happened? What's going on?" he asked, unable to hide the anxiety in his voice. Emily blinked a few times, trying to process what she had just heard. "The company. There was a restructuring," she said, still in shock. "One of the main sponsors pulled their funding and they're cutting back on new dancers. I'm not going to New York anymore. They said the offer has been withdrawn." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Michael stood still, struggling to process the information. He didn't know if he should feel relieved or worried. On the one hand, this meant Emily wouldn't have to leave, but on the other, he knew how much that dream had meant to her. He approached her slowly, cautiously, as if any wrong word could shatter the fragile situation they were in. "Emily," he began, gently holding her hands. I'm so sorry. This is awful. I know how much this meant to you." Emily shook her head, trying to control the wave of emotions crashing over her. It was a confusing mix of relief, despair, and a crushing sense of loss. She had spent so long preparing for this change, and now it had all evaporated with a single phone call. "I don't know what to think," she said, feeling the confusion cloud her mind. "I've spent months preparing for this, imagining what life would be like in New York, and now it's all gone." Michael watched in silence as Emily struggled to cope with the sudden change. He felt her pain, but at the same time, he couldn't help but think that maybe this was a chance for them. As much as he wanted to support her in this moment of frustration, part of him couldn't stop thinking that maybe this was their opportunity to stay together without the distance. "Maybe," he began hesitantly, "maybe this is an opportunity." Emily looked at him with an unreadable expression, trying to understand what he meant. "An opportunity?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Michael, I just lost the dream of my life. How could this be an opportunity?" Michael took a step back, feeling the weight of her word. He knew the moment was delicate, but he couldn't shake the thought of what this meant for their relationship. "I didn't mean it like that," he quickly corrected himself. "I just think that now you don't have to go. We can be together, here, without that distance that scared us so much. I don't want you to give up on anything, but maybe there's another way, another opportunity, right here in Los Angeles." Emily stared at him for a long moment, her heart torn between the desire to stay with Michael and the pain of losing her chance to shine on the stages of New York. She pulled away from him, walking over to the window, gazing out at the city she knew so well. Michael, I don't know if I can see this as an opportunity. I've spent my entire life wanting that, and now, it's all gone. I love you, but I don't know if I can just change my plans, my dream, just because it didn't work out this time. I need time to figure out what I'm going to do. Michael could feel the weight of Emily's words. Even with the news, the decision was far from simple. He stepped closer to her, respecting her space but maintaining the love and support he had always shown her. I know this is hard, he said softly, and I'll be here for you, no matter what you decide. Even if you find another opportunity far from here, I'll support you, Emily. Those words finally opened the floodgates Emily had been holding back. She turned toward Michael and hugged him tightly, letting all the emotion she had been holding inside pour out. Tears streamed down her face, and in that embrace, their love felt both stronger and more fragile than ever before, faced with the unknown future. In the days following the call from the New York Dance Company, Emily felt like she was on an emotional roller coaster. The initial relief of not having to say goodbye to Michael gave way to a deep void and uncertainty. She had spent years preparing for the opportunity that had been taken from her so suddenly. At the same time, her heart was divided. The relief of not leaving Los Angeles and Michael, and the pain of watching her dream crumble before her eyes. Michael, on his part, tried to be the support Emily needed. He knew how much dance meant to her, and he also knew it wouldn't be easy for her to move on from this loss. Yet a part of him was also relieved. The fear of distance and the uncertainty about their future was now temporarily lifted. But he knew this wasn't the final answer. Emily's dream still hung between them, even if reality had changed. One afternoon, Emily sat alone in the studio where she usually rehearsed. The space that had always been her sanctuary now felt filled with unanswered questions. She stared at herself in the mirror, repeating the same movements that had once brought her so much comfort. But nothing felt right. The sense of loss consumed her, and the uncertainty about her future was overwhelming. As she danced, her mind wandered. She thought of Michael, of how understanding he had been through all of this. She loved him deeply, and the thought of staying with him in Los Angeles was tempting. But a growing doubt crept into her mind. Could she ever truly be happy without following the dream she had chased her whole life? That night, back at the apartment, Emily found Michael on the couch, sculpting something small out of clay, a simple piece without any grand ambitions. He looked up at her, a soft smile on his face, but he immediately sensed the heavy air she carried. "How was rehearsal?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation light. It was fine, I guess," Emily replied hesitantly. She sat next to him, feeling the weight of everything she wasn't saying. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, just being in each other's presence. Michael knew Emily was grappling with something deep inside, something he couldn't fix for her. Eventually, it was Emily who broke the silence. "I don't know if I can keep going like this, Michael," she said, her voice low, almost as if confessing a secret. "I'm trying to move forward, but it feels like part of me is still stuck in that dream. Part of me is in New York even though I've never been." Michael paused his sculpting, set the piece aside, and looked at her seriously. "I understand. And I know what happened was unfair, but maybe this is just a temporary setback. You're too talented to give up now, Emily. New York may have slipped away this time, but that doesn't mean it's over. There will be other opportunities." She sighed, feeling the weight of his words. "I want to believe that. But at the same time, I feel lost. I don't know what to do. And I feel like even if another chance comes along, I'll have to go through all of this again. The separation, the distance, the fear of losing you." Michael listened intently, sensing the depth of her anguish. He loved Emily more than anything, but he also knew her dream was a vital part of who she was. The constant tension of this unresolved future was wearing her down, and he didn't want to be the one holding her back from everything she had worked so hard for. "I don't want you to feel tied down by me, Emily," Michael said firmly. "I love you, more than you know. But I can't be the reason you give up what you've always wanted. If another opportunity comes, I want you to take it. Even if that means we'll have to be apart again." Emily turned to him, surprised by the intensity of his words. She knew Michael had always been understanding, but hearing him say he was ready to let her go once again filled her with both gratitude and pain. While she appreciated his selfless love, she also felt the agony of knowing they might never live a life completely together. "Michael, are you saying you want me to go?" she asked, hesitant, afraid of the answer. "No, that's not it," he said, holding her hands firmly. "What I want is for you to be happy. And if dance is what does that, then you need to keep going, even if it means leaving again. I know I can't hold you here, Emily. I never wanted to be that person. What I want is for you not to have regrets." Michael's words echoed in Emily's thoughts. She knew he was right. She didn't want to look back years from now and feel like she had given up something so important out of fear of losing someone she loved. But at the same time, the idea of leaving him again felt unbearable. "I don't want to lose you," Emily said, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I could live knowing I chose a dream and lost you in the process." Michael took a deep breath, trying to stay calm despite the storm of emotions inside him. "Maybe that's the point, Emily. Maybe we have to accept that sometimes loving someone means letting them go so they can find their own way. I'll never forget you, and I'll always be rooting for you wherever you are. But I don't want our love to become an anchor that keeps you from flying." The honesty in Michael's words hit Emily like a wave of reality. He was willing to sacrifice his own heart to ensure she wouldn't lose the chance to live her dream. The conflict within her now reached its peak. Choose the love and security Michael offered, or follow her uncertain dream, with the pain of leaving him behind. "I don't know what to do," she said, tears welling up, feeling helpless in the face of the situation. Michael cupped her face, looking deeply into her eyes, conveying all the love and compassion he felt. "You don't have to decide right now, but whatever you choose, I'll understand. And I'll support you, Emily, always, because that's what love means to me." Emily's heart tightened. It was a decision that would define both their futures, and she knew that no matter what she chose, the consequences would be profound. She would need courage, and above all, she would need to ask herself what truly mattered most for her happiness. She looked at Michael, and the magnitude of the moment washed over her completely. They were at the peak of their conflict, and a choice would have to be made soon. The next morning, Los Angeles was wrapped in a soft fog. Emily stood by the apartment window, watching the still quiet streets and the sun struggling to break through the clouds. There was a sense of calm in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. Michael's words from the night before echoed in her mind. He was willing to let her go, to sacrifice their relationship for the sake of her dream, and that painful generosity was tearing her heart apart. She knew time was running out for a decision. Part of her wanted to stay, to build a life with Michael, who loved and supported her so much. But another part, the one that had always dreamed of the big stages and the bright lights of New York, knew that desire would never fully fade, even if she ignored it now. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Emily picked up her phone and, without hesitation, called Claire, her longtime mentor and friend. Claire had always been a wise guide in her dance career, offering constant support from the very beginning. Now, more than ever, Emily needed to hear what she had to say. "Claire, I need help," Emily said the moment Claire answered, her trembling voice revealing just how shaken she was. "Emily, what happened, dear?" Claire asked, her tone calm as always, but laced with clear concern. "The dance company withdrew my offer. I'm not going to New York anymore. And now, I don't know what to do. I feel lost. I love Michael, but I feel like if I stay here, I'll always wonder what could have been." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Claire sighed before responding. "Oh, Emily, I'm so sorry about your offer. But you need to ask yourself, what really makes you happy? Not what others expect from you, not what you think you need to do, but what your heart truly wants. You've spent your whole life chasing the dream of dancing, and now you have Michael, someone who loves you deeply. Only you can decide what matters more right now." Claire's words weighed heavily on Emily. She knew Claire was right. The answer wasn't about choosing between right or wrong. It was about understanding what would truly bring peace to her heart. She hung up the phone and turned back to the horizon, reflecting deeply on what she had been searching for in her life. The next few hours were filled with introspection. Emily walked around the apartment, taking in every corner, every detail of the life she had built in Los Angeles. She thought about her early days as a dancer, the struggles and victories she had faced to get to where she was. But she also thought of Michael, how he had become a part of her life in a way she had never planned. He was her anchor, her safe harbor, but her heart still yearned for the unknown, for the stage she had never set foot on. Michael arrived at the apartment late in the afternoon, his usual calm expression intact, even amid the chaos. He knew Emily was lost in thought, and patiently waited for her to decide what she needed to do. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, stepping closer to her. Emily looked at him, feeling a tightness in her chest as she realized that no matter what she decided, a piece of her heart would break. She stepped closer, holding Michael's hands, and for the first time in days, she felt ready to speak. "Michael, I've thought a lot about everything. About us, about New York, about what I really want. And I realized that while I love you more than anything, a part of me will always be somewhere else if I don't at least try to follow my dream. Michael looked at her in silence, absorbing her words with a calmness that was tinged with sadness. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it felt like a cold blade cutting through his heart. He tried to smile, a sad smile full of understanding. "I knew you'd come to this conclusion," he said softly. "And I respect that, Emily, because I've always known you were meant for something bigger. I never wanted to be the reason you gave up on anything." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words, the love he offered unconditionally. And in that moment, she realized something even deeper. Michael was willing to let go of what they had for something he knew was essential to her. This was the kind of love that transcended selfishness, the kind she knew she would never find elsewhere. "But," she continued, her voice breaking, trying to hold back the tears, "I also realize that I can pursue my dream in other ways. I don't need New York to be happy as a dancer. There are other opportunities, other paths. And if I lose you in the process, no success I achieve will ever have the same value." Michael stood still, clearly surprised by her words. He blinked, as if trying to process what was happening. "What are you saying, Emily?" he asked cautiously. She took a deep breath, feeling the tears finally escape down her face. Emily had made her decision. "I'm saying I'm not going to New York. Not now, at least. I can't, because I want to try to find balance, a way to follow my dream without losing you. I don't need a specific dance company to be happy, but I do need you in my life." Michael stared at her in silence for a moment, and then slowly, a shy smile began to form on his face, as if he had been holding on to hope for so long that he was afraid to let it bloom. He pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the warmth of her body against his, and for the first time in weeks, the weight on both of their chests seemed to lift. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so happy you feel this way because all I've ever wanted is for you to be happy, wherever that may be, even if that where is here, with me." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling the relief wash over her. They stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, for long minutes, as if time had stopped. The decision had been made, and though there were still challenges ahead, Emily finally felt at peace with her choice. Life wouldn't be perfect, and she knew she would still face obstacles and new opportunities that would test her commitment. But in that moment beside Michael, Emily was certain she had made the right choice for herself. Dance would always be part of her life, but now she knew there was also room for the love she had found in Michael. That night, the two of them stayed together, talking about the future and the possibilities that now lay open to them. The path they would choose wouldn't be easy, but they knew that together, they could face anything. The morning sun streamed gently through the windows of Emily's apartment, casting soft light and shadows across the wooden floor. She woke up next to Michael, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in weeks, the weight of indecision had lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Emily had made the decision to stay in Los Angeles, by the side of the man she loved, and now she was beginning to discover how to balance her dream with this new phase of her life. The following days were filled with a lightness they hadn't felt since the conversations about New York began. Their relationship, once on the brink of being consumed by fear and separation, now seemed renewed. They rediscovered the joy in small things, like having coffee together in the morning or walking along Venice Beach at sunset, without the constant pressure of a looming goodbye. Michael, who had always been the steady rock in Emily's life, now seemed more relieved and excited, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders too. He returned to the studio with renewed energy, and his sculptures began to reflect this new state of mind. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, that Emily's path as a dancer wouldn't be easy, but he felt that together they could face anything. Meanwhile, Emily returned to rehearsals at the local dance studio. Though her career in New York had been paused, she knew there were many other opportunities to explore. Claire, her mentor, encouraged her to consider new possibilities, like performing with smaller companies or even starting new projects in Los Angeles. And with Michael's support, Emily began to see that her passion for dance didn't have to be tied to a specific place. "You have so much talent, Emily. New York isn't the only way," Claire told her after a rehearsal. "I know it was hard to accept at first, but I believe you can find a new way to dance that's just as meaningful as what you envisioned for yourself." Those words began to resonate with Emily. She started to consider how she could transform her love for dance into something that fit the life she was building with Michael. Instead of holding on to the idea that she needed to be in New York to be successful, Emily began to open up to new opportunities in Los Angeles. The future was still uncertain, but the pressure had eased. Now, her journey wasn't about proving herself to the world, but about finding herself in the process. One afternoon, Michael invited Emily to his studio. He had been working on a new piece that he wanted to show her. When they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, filling the space with a golden light. Emily watched as Michael uncovered a sculpture he had been working on in secret. It was a ballerina, but this time, the figure looked different from all the others he had made. There was a graceful movement in the arms, as if she were in the middle of a spin, her head tilted towards the sky, with an expression of freedom and joy on her face. But the detail that touched Emily the most was the fact that, sculpted beside the ballerina, there was another figure. A man, Michael, watching her with admiration. The sculpture captured not only the essence of dance, but also the depth of their connection. Emily brought her hand to her face, moved by the delicacy and significance of the piece. "Michael, it's beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." Michael smiled, his eyes shining. "I wanted to really capture you this time. Not just the dancer who moves, but the person I love, who is so much more than motion. I wanted to capture us, together, in this new chapter." She looked at him, her heart warming. It was as if the sculpture symbolized everything they had been through, and all that was still ahead. The sculpture showed that despite all the fear and doubts, the love they shared was something that kept them strong. "You always manage to see me in a way I don't see myself," she replied, holding Michael's hands. "And now I realize that I don't have to sacrifice who I am to be with you. I can be a dancer and love you at the same time. We can find a way to make this work." In the months that followed, Emily began exploring new dance opportunities in Los Angeles. She performed at small festivals and in alternative spaces where she could express her art more freely. The pressure of New York no longer weighed on her. Dance was still her passion, but now she was learning to integrate it in a way that made sense with her current life. And with Michael by her side, she felt like she was finally building something solid and true. The two of them learned to support each other in deeper ways. Michael continued with his sculptures, always inspired by the movement and beauty of Emily's dancing. And she, in turn, remained dedicated to her art, knowing that she had someone by her side who understood her in a way no one else could. What once seemed like an impossible choice, love or career, had now transformed into a journey where both could coexist. Emily realized that the dream of New York, while still important, wasn't the only path to her happiness. There were other dreams to live, other dances to perform. And Michael was there, not as an anchor holding her back, but as a force propelling her to be who she truly was. One night, as they walked along Venice Beach, the city lights shimmering in the distance and the gentle sound of waves crashing, Michael suddenly stopped and looked at Emily. "You know, I never thought we'd be here after everything that happened." He smiled, that soft smile that always put her at ease. "But I'm so grateful for it." Emily smiled back, intertwining her fingers with his. "Me too. I think sometimes life takes us down paths we didn't expect, and that's okay." She took a deep breath, feeling the cool ocean breeze. "Because now I realize that even if my dreams change, what matters most is living fully in the present. And the present, Michael, is better than I could have imagined." They continued walking in silence, but with the certainty that together they could face anything. The love they shared was strong, and life, though unpredictable, now seemed lighter. Time passed, and Emily and Michael's life took on a new, more harmonious rhythm. Spring had arrived in Los Angeles, bringing a lightness in the air that reflected their state of mind. Now, months after Emily's decision to stay and build something with Michael, she felt more at peace with her choices than she ever thought possible. Their days were filled with a new but pleasant routine. Michael spent long hours in his studio, working on new sculptures, each piece reflecting a different phase of his personal and creative journey. His career as a sculptor had gained new momentum, with exhibitions being scheduled and galleries showing interest in his works that uniquely captured the movement of dance. He credited much of this success to Emily's influence in his life, a constant source of inspiration. Emily, for her part, had also found a way to pursue her passion for dance without sacrificing what she had built with Michael. Instead of seeking out big companies like the ones in New York, she began exploring local alternatives, discovering a vibrant contemporary dance scene in Los Angeles. Now she was part of a small but innovative independent dance company that gave her the creative freedom she had always craved. More than that, she became involved in side projects, teaching dance classes to children in underserved neighborhoods. She found new meaning in her art by sharing her passion with the next generation. Every smile, every moment of progress from her students reminded her that true success wasn't just measured by the grandeur of the stage, but by the impact she had on the lives of those around her. "I never thought teaching could be so rewarding," Emily said one evening as she and Michael had dinner at home. "Seeing those kids discover dance, seeing the light in their eyes when they master a move, it makes me feel like I'm really doing something important." Michael smiled, happy to see her so fulfilled. "You're creating something beautiful, Emily. You're leaving your mark on the world in a way that goes beyond the stage. I always knew you'd do something special." Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling a genuine sense of satisfaction. The desire for recognition on New York stages still existed, but it was no longer a burden. She had found a new way to live her passion, one that allowed her to be the artist she had always dreamed of, without giving up what mattered most in her personal life. A few months later, Emily and Michael began thinking about new steps for the future. Their relationship, forged through so many challenges, was now stronger than ever. Every small victory, whether in dance or sculpture, was celebrated together, and every difficulty was faced with the mutual support they always maintained. One sunny afternoon, while strolling through Griffith Park, Michael suddenly stopped, pulling something from his pocket. Emily looked at him, curious, and then saw him kneel before her, holding a small box. "Emily," he said with a light and sincere smile, "our story has gone through so many ups and downs. We've faced distance, the fear of losing each other, but in the end we always found a way to stay together. You're the person I want by my side forever, no matter what happened." He opened the small box, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Emily's heart raced and a wide smile spread across her face. Tears of happiness filled her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak immediately. When the words finally came, her voice was filled with emotion. "Yes, Michael. Yes, I will." Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, laughing through tears of joy. That moment, simple and full of meaning, seemed to encapsulate everything they had been through and built together. Their wedding wouldn't be grand or extravagant, but it would reflect the essence of who they were as a couple, intimate, authentic, and based on the genuine love they shared. The life they were creating wasn't perfect, but it was exactly what they both needed. A few months later, they got married in a small ceremony in Michael's studio, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The studio, which had so often been the place where doubts and fears manifested, was now the setting for a new beginning. Michael's sculptures adorned the space, and Emily gave a small dance performance during the ceremony, blending the worlds they both loved so much. The future for Emily and Michael wasn't certain, but they were ready to face it together, knowing their love had overcome greater challenges than they had ever imagined. Dance remained a vital part of Emily's life, just as sculpture was for Michael, but now everything felt more balanced. They had learned that while dreams might change, true love is what gives meaning to all achievements. Every now and then, Emily still thought of New York, of how her life might have been different if she had followed that path. But when she looked at Michael, at the man who had always supported and believed in her, she knew the life they had was the most beautiful of choreographies, a balanced dance between love, art, and shared dreams. And so, Emily and Michael continued on together, building a life rooted in love, respect, and mutual support. They had learned that true happiness doesn't come only from achieving a dream, but from balancing the pursuit of those dreams with cultivating the relationships that truly matter. The future was open for them, and together, they were ready to dance every step of the journey. Thank you for watching Emily and Michael's emotional journey. If you were moved by their story of love and tough choices, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories. We have exciting new stories almost every day, so stay tuned to the links appearing on the screen right now. Many more incredible stories are waiting for you. See you next time.